So let's talk about the problem I call toenails, healthcare, and economic calculation. In thinking through the issues economically and philosophically of healthcare and the costs involved in it, and mandating healthcare and trying to socialize those costs. I don't mean the word to be weighed down, just that the costs are paid for through social programs by taxes. We have to think through the fact of economic calculation. Economic calculation is the process by which we as individuals make decisions based on our real-time wants and needs, and along the same lines, the process those who produce goods and services decide what is the right amount, where, when, and how to produce the right amount of goods and services to meet people's needs. Now, you can do that imperfectly with a price coordinated system because prices indicate the real time scarcity of goods and services, because prices are signals that help us make decisions, but they also indicate supply and demand. And we don't have to have perfect knowledge. The prices give us information to which we respond naturally. We like lower prices and we don't like higher prices. And so we make our purchasing decisions accordingly on that basis. They give us that information about what is available, where, when, and how much, and who also wants it at the same time. So prices rise either because there is a limited supply, scarcity, or more people want that same scarce supply at the same time, or both. And that tends, other things being equal, to cause prices to rise. Now, prices go down because there's usually an increase in supply. It could be a literal increase in supply, or just access to something, or less people want it at the same time, or both. Now, not only do those prices give us information as consumers to help us calculate how to fulfill our own economic wants and needs in order and in real time, and with the specific knowledge we have of ourselves and what we want and how we rank what we want and prioritize it. They also help producers, and this is producers of anything, but it's also in thinking about producers of medical goods and services as well. Producers are guided by prices in the system because prices indicate for producers scarcity, how much is available, and demand, supply and demand. They tell them how much is available, how many people want it, whether those wants are being filled, where resources are more urgently needed at other points in the economy. Now, if you didn't have prices on either the consuming or the producing side, you don't have that specific real-time knowledge of what's going on elsewhere in the economy and the supply and demand of goods and services. And producers have no way of knowing whether they are effectively meeting people's wants and needs or using the best and most effective means to an end to fulfill people's wants and needs. And therefore, it's left up to a lot of guesswork. And that's the problem of economic calculation. That basically, without prices, without real-time information, where people are allowed to interact freely with nature and with one another, there starts to be distortions based on lack of knowledge of what's happening in other places in the economy at the same time. And the economy is very complicated in the way it's all interconnected. And so that's what brings me to this discussion of toenails and healthcare, along with economic calculation. Because with that problem that I've just stated being as it is, when you have a sort of socialized program of medicine or anything else, you have to mandate basically every kind of healthcare to make sure everything is covered. Now, you may remember this episode of The Office where Michael, who's the boss, doesn't want to be unpopular in a certain decision, but he has to choose among some options for the healthcare for his whole office. He delegates this to Dwight, who sits there and chooses. And at some point, Dwight gets frustrated and basically creates a list, a piece of paper on a clipboard, and wants everybody to write down their diseases and their medical things that he wants covered, which has privacy issues and all these things. And they start making up diseases to mess with him. But the problem that he runs into is actually insightful of a real economic problem. Is he starts to not believe that things on there are real, but they actually are real specific needs that people have in real time that he didn't know about. Now imagine trying to cover all healthcare issues for all people in their different circumstances, their different ages, their different life situations. And by the way, you'd have to pay for all of it. So the example I give, although it could be giving birth or anything else, the example I give is toenails. Most people, when I teach to 17 and 18-year-olds in 12th grade economics, I said, if you were to write down for yourself what you anticipate your healthcare needs to be for the next year, you can't predict everything, obviously. You don't know if you're going to get kidney failure or cancer or something of that nature, and hopefully you don't. But you probably want to be covered for those things, but one thing you probably would not think to include on there is trimming your toenails. Like, what? It doesn't make any sense. What are you talking about? Well, for people who are older, it's actually very common for them to go to have a nurse or some other medical professional trim their toenails because they're less flexible. It's hard to bend over. There's these different issues that make trimming their toenails, thing that younger and healthier people can do regularly without ever thinking that it would be something that they would need on a medical basis. But it's actually fairly common for people, I'll say over 60, to get their toenails trimmed on a regular basis by a medical professional. Or, a lot of people go and get pedicures, okay? When you have to catch all so that you don't medical issues because you can't specialize and you can't calculate, that means that everything has to be covered so as not to leave anything out. Therefore, a young person who doesn't go to the doctor very often and is generally healthy is having to pay into such a system, not only for what they might use it for, but they're also having to subsidize the system for those who have needs for their toenails to be trimmed, for those who might give birth, for those who have cancer, for those who have all these other things. That's not the function of how insurance works. Insurance covers some more general or specific things with regard to paying of premiums to be covered in those instances. It's not the same thing to have insurance based on this type of system that I'm describing. So this ends up being a system in which either needs do not get met because they can't be calculated in real time, or everything becomes covered and therefore it becomes prohibitively expensive. And so that's the issue with toenails, healthcare, and economic calculation.